Hey guys, it's Wes with Dirt Concepts. Today we're going to do a quick tutorial on ESC tuning for A-scale electric buggy. When I've been out the track past couple times, I've noticed some of the sportsman level guys and even some of the more experienced racers have had their throttle and brake settings on their ESCs kind of like a light switch. So one thing to keep in mind is, just like when 10 scale racing, even for A-scale racing, ESC tuning is actually really critical to your setup of your buggy or truck. So without further ado, let's get started. So the first thing we're going to cover here is your two different options for configuring the settings on your ESC. I specifically run the Hobbywing setup. So I run a Hobbywing XR8 Pro G2 ESC. And as far as tuning it, Hobbywing actually offers two different options. And I know that, you know, Tekin has their own wireless programmer option. Reedy has a programmer box, just like the Hobbywing here. So the first option for Hobbywing is the program box. In this case, I feel like these are actually a little bit easier to use and they're simpler. It's just that it's takes a little bit longer to kind of scroll through the menus though. And it's really nice to have preset profiles that you can switch between using the wireless programmer app, which we'll get to next. So this one's pretty simple. You basically just plug it into the ESC, power up the buggy or truck, and you make your setting changes from there, and then you save it once you're done. The other option here, and this is actually the old model that Hobbywing had, and this is the Wi-Fi Express model. They now have a Bluetooth OTA model. So just like the program box, you plug it into the ESC, power up the buggy, open the app, and you either connect to the wireless module with Wi-Fi or over Bluetooth, and you download the Hobbywing app to your phone, which I believe it's definitely offered for iPhone. This is an iPhone. It's also offered for the Android phones as well. I'm not sure if it's offered to the Microsoft-based software phones. So let's kind of get into the settings and why they're important. So let's hop right into the ESC settings. First thing you want to do is download the Hobbywing app on your iPhone or Android-based phone. From there, you can go ahead and plug in the Wi-Fi module or Bluetooth over-the-air module into your ESC, power up the ESC, and go ahead and connect via Bluetooth or Wi-Fi to your wireless module. Once that is complete, we'll talk about the general settings. So the first thing up here, as I said, is the general settings. So you can see that the first option here is the running mode. Running mode is essentially, you can either set it to have forward with brake or forward with reverse and brake, or either forward and reverse. For racing, you can't have reverse, so you're always going to forward brake. It is nice though to be able to have the option for forward brake and reverse for practice days when you don't have turn marshals, or if you're just learning a track, for example. Max reverse force, kind of irrelevant. I just set mine at the lowest setting at 25%. LiPo for A scale, you're always going to run 4 cells. So that's at 4 cell LiPo setting. For my LiPo cutoff, you can leave it at the standard setting, but I always just set mine at 13.6 volts. It's just a personal preference of mine. I know I can make 10 minutes running the ProTech 6400 Shorty 4S battery pack. The next setting is your ESC and motor thermal protection. I go ahead and enable them. After that, we have the BAC voltage. What that is the amount of power that's going to your servo. In this case, I'm running a ProTech 170 SBL servo, which is extremely fast. So I actually just leave mine at 6.0 volts. If you want to have your cooling fan spin faster for both your motor and your ESC, you can actually turn that up if you have compatible fans. So it can be turned up to 8.4 volts. If it's a really hot day during a race, I may actually turn mine up also to 8.4 volts. And then I'll go into my transmitter and turn down the steering speed on my buggy to make it comparable to what it was with 6 volts. Sensor mode, it's always full censored. And then the motor rotation, it just depends on your model. In this case, the Mugen, you're always going to use counterclockwise. And then I disabled my phase AC swap. That's if, for example, I'm trying to think of a model that would be like that. Potentially like a Techno, where the motor is in line with the ESC. In that case, you would potentially want to reverse or you want to change the A and C phases, so that way your wiring is cleaner. Getting into throttle control. So I found the sweet spot for throttle control is right around 25. This is a graduated scale from 1 to 30. And what that is it's basically how quick your throttle ramps in. There's a lot of different settings in here around that, but this is kind of the main parameter for how quickly that throttle ramps in. And it's not the same as your drive frequency, so we'll get into that. Throttle curve, I always use linear for all A-scale electric applications. Neutral range, a lot of guys actually prefer 6%. I actually prefer mine at 8%. I like more of a numb trigger feel, maybe just because my local track is a little bit looser. Initial throttle force, the general starting point I think is 1% on that. That way the buggy has just the minimum amount of power when you first start touching that throttle trigger. Coast, for A-scale buggy and truggy, you're always going to want to have that at 0%. I believe times when you'd want coast would be for on-road applications or maybe oval. I'm not sure. I don't race on-road or oval. It'd be a good question for one of those guys. Leave a comment below on what your thoughts are on coast. PWM drive frequency. So this is another very critical setting. Basically, this is the number of steps that are in the throttle curve. So in this case, I have 12,000 throttle steps in my throttle curve. The smaller the number, the more aggressive feel the throttle has. So with that being said, the higher the number, it also makes your ESC run hotter. So something to keep in mind, if the grip is lower, for example, you may want to look at running a higher drive frequency number. Softening value and softening range, I run mine at 0%. Now, for somebody who's less experienced or maybe still learning how to drive their A-scale buggy or truggy, you may actually want a softening value or softening range. What that is it's how many degrees of timing that the motor is pulling during a specified percentage of the throttle range. So if I say, 10 degrees on my softening value and my softening range is 50%, it's going to pull 10 degrees of timing from that motor during the first 50% of the throttle, if that makes sense. And that's your throttle control. Okay, next up is brake control. Drag brake. For four-wheel drive vehicles, I would say not all the time, but almost all the time you're going to run 0% drag brake. In some cases, let's say that you need more turn in on a sweeper and it kind of necks down and it gets really tight, but it's also high speed, and you want to have more steering coming in through that sweeper. You may want to run just a little bit of drag brake, maybe like anywhere from 3 to 5%. But again, I never run it. I always just manually operate my brakes. But go ahead and try it out and see what you think. Max brake force. I never recommend setting this at 100%. I set mine at 80%, especially in electric truggy. That is a really good way to start actually barking your diff gears. And I've seen this happen in a variety of different brands and models. I don't know about Mugen's doing it. I've never seen it happen, but I've seen it in several other different models. So that is one way you can reduce the risk of that. And it can happen in buggy too if grip's really high. So I always set mine at 80%. And then in the transmitter, you can always go ahead and turn it up to 100% there if you want to. Brake rate control. I leave mine at the standard setting at 20. Again, that's how fast your brakes ramp in. I like my brakes to ramp in relatively quick because when you're on the brakes, you really need to be on them hard most of the time. Brake curve, I always use linear, no matter what, for all A-scale applications. Brake frequency, this is another critical setting. I actually prefer my brake frequency is a little bit higher. I had mine set at 8K, and I think again, because my local track's a little bit lower grip than a lot of tracks. So in some cases, let's say the grip comes up or you have a little bit of a groove developing on the track, you may want to look at something like 4K as your brake frequency. Unlike, like a two-wheel drive application where you're going to run really low brake frequency, like somewhere around 2K or maybe even 1K. So that is the brake control settings. All right, next topic we're going to cover here is the timing settings. So with timing, you really have two parts to that. First, you have your boost timing, and second, you have your turbo timing. Boost timing it will impact the entire throttle curve, and it also generates quite a bit of heat in your ESC, and it can also produce extra heat also in the motor of the buggy or truck. I always run my boost timing at 0 degrees. I found that these motors, both for buggy and truck, have plenty of power. There's no reason to run any boost. I haven't at least found an application where I need extra power. Turbo timing, that is going to be at the top end of your RPM range, where you can essentially add more top speed to your buggy. And this is kind of a subjective setting here, but I typically run anywhere from 8 to at most 12 degrees of turbo timing, and a lot of that also depends on the can timing on your motor, and it depends on the brand that you're running as well. So don't just go out and put 10 degrees of timing on your motor, or sorry, in your ESC. Go ahead and test it. Try 5 degrees, or if you feel like you have more than enough top end already, don't run any. So this is something you add if you feel like you need more top end, but you don't necessarily want to go up in your overall gearing of your buggy or truck. So I run usually from 8 to 12 degrees of turbo timing for the hobby wing, and this is a G3 A scale motor. As far as turbo delay, so that's how quickly the timing starts to ramp in. So in this case, I have a 0.15 second delay programmed into my turbo timing. You want to have some kind of delay in there. You don't want instant. That way, if you just grab the throttle, it doesn't just instantly spool up into, let's say the can time is at 20 degrees, it doesn't spool up to 30 degrees of timing instantly when you do that. For the turbo increase rate, this is a good tuning setting. So if you feel like the top end power is too aggressive, you can actually lower that turbo increase rate. So I actually have mine lower in the spectrum I run. I usually run 9 to 12 degrees. So I had mine set at 9 right now, probably because last time I drove the buggy, it was a little bit lower grip when I was at the top end of that higher RPM range. Turbo decrease rate, I run mine instant actually for A scale buggy, because they generate a lot of grip when on the brakes, and when you let off the throttle, they have a lot of weight to them. So you can run it instant off basically on your turbo decrease rate. So when you would want to have some kind of a slew rate programmed in there and it wasn't instant, would be, let's say the track is very, very loose and it goes from extremely high speed sections to more of a technical slower section coming right out of that high speed section, and you could potentially get kind of loose when you get off the throttle as the motor ramps back down to its normal RPM range. So, and down at the bottom here we have the data records. So from the last time I ran the buggy, it tells you, your max ESC temp, motor temp, what your minimum battery voltage was, and what your max motor RPM was. So it's just good telemetry data to have. Anyway, I hope this tutorial helps you out next time you're at the track and helps you improve your lap times. Please like and subscribe if you want to see more content just like this. Thanks.